The night is a cold, living thing. It bites. It seeps through wool and leather, settling into the bones of the men who stand guard. The date is March 5th, 1770. The place, King Street, Boston. A foot of old, grimy snow lines the streets, frozen hard as iron in the harbour wind. The scene is not silent. It is a low symphony of threat. The crunch of British Army boots on frozen grit. The muttering of a gathering crowd, a dozen, then 3 dozen, then more, their breath-forming ghosts in the lantern light. The tense, rhythmic tap of a teenager's stick against a fence. And beneath it all, the deep, sour smell of a seaport town in winter. Salt, rotting fish, wood smoke, and the ever-present tang of spilled beer. A single British soldier, Private Hugh White, stands his post alone outside the custom house. He is isolated. A young man far from home, his red-coat a target in the gloom. Words are thrown. A taunt, a threat, a chunk of wood, then a jagged piece of ice, flies from the shadows. It strikes his shoulder. His musket grip tightens. His eyes dart. He is a soldier of the most powerful empire on earth, but here, on this frozen street, he is a cornered animal. The crowd presses closer. Their faces are pale smudges in the dark, twisted with anger 2 years in the making. They are rope makers and dock workers, apprentices and merchants. They call him a lobster, a bloody back. They dare him to fire. Fire, you bloody bastard, fire. He does not fire. Instead, he shouts for help, his voice cracking against the brick and timber. The bells of Boston's churches begin to ring, not for worship, but for alarm. A signal. The mob is now 100 strong. They are not an army. They are a force of nature, a surge of pent-up rage given form. 7 British soldiers, led by Captain Thomas Preston, march in ragged relief, bayonets fixed. They push through the throng, a scarlet wedge in a sea of dun-coloured homespun and fury. They form a semicircle around Private White, their backs to the custom house wall. Their orders are simple: defend the post, disperse the crowd. But the crowd does not disperse. It heaves. It screams. Lobsters. Fire. Why don't you fire? The soldiers level their muskets. The polished steel of the bayonets catches the flickering light from nearby windows. A club is swung. It strikes Private Montgomery on the arm. He staggers. A voice, sharp and clear, cuts above the din fire. Who shouted it? A soldier. A man in the crowd. The word is lost, swallowed by the chaos, but its consequence is eternal. A flash. A deafening crack that rips the night in two. A puff of bitter-smelling smoke. For a heartbeat, nothing. The crowd freezes, stunned by the sound. Then, a second shot. And another. 5, 6, 7, 11 shots in a ragged volley. The smoke thickens, an acrid cloud that stings the eyes and claws the throat. Through the haze, men are falling. Not soldiers. Civilians. They crumple onto the frozen street. The sound that follows the gunfire is not a scream, but a collective gasp, a city holding its breath. Then, the panic. The crowd scatters, slipping on ice, leaving behind the still and writhing bodies. The snow, pristine white hours before, is now a dark, spreading stain. One of the fallen is Crispus Attucks, a man of African and Native American descent, a sailor. He is the first to die, a massive man felled by 2 musket balls to the chest. Beside him, James Caldwell, a mate from a ship, is killed instantly. Samuel Gray, a rope maker, has the right side of his head blown away. Samuel Maverick, a 17-year-old apprentice, clutches his stomach, dying hours later in his mother's house. Patrick Carr, an Irish immigrant, is shot in the back, a mortal wound that will take him days to succumb to. The soldiers, their faces pale with shock, reload. Captain Preston barks an order. They hold their position, weapons raised, facing a street that is suddenly, horrifically, empty save for the victims. The silence returns, now heavier, pregnant with a new kind of terror. The smoke begins to drift, carrying the unmistakable copper scent of blood into the cold Boston air. This is not the spark of revolution. Not yet. This is the flint striking steel. In the tense, frozen minutes after the last echo fades, no one knows what will catch fire. We must pull back from that bloody patch of snow, from those 11 stunned men in red coats. To understand the fury in that mob, the fear in those soldiers' eyes, we must step into the Boston of the 1760s. A city under occupation, though the Crown called it protection. Imagine a bustling port, the lifeblood of a colony, being slowly strangled. After the costly French and Indian War, Britain is drowning in debt. The solution? Tax the colonies. The Stamp Act. The Townshend Acts. Duties on paper, on glass, on lead, on the very tea Bostonians drink. To enforce these unpopular laws, thousands of British troops, regulars of His Majesty's Army, are billeted in the town. The soundscape of the city changes. Now, alongside the cries of fishmongers and the creak of ship rigging, is the incessant, regimented beat of the drum as redcoats drill in the public squares. The sight of armed patrols, marching down streets named for English kings, becomes mundane. The smell changes, too. The stale beer and sweat of crowded barracks seeps into the homes of private citizens, for the law requires colonists to house these soldiers. Resentment simmers, then boils. The colonists have no voice in Parliament. No taxation without representation is not a political slogan. It is a scream of principle. They are Englishmen, they argue, entitled to the rights of Englishmen. The soldiers are the iron fist of tyranny, a daily reminder of their subjugation. The men in the ranks, for their part, are not villains. They are often poor, enlisted for life out of desperation. They are scorned by the Bostonians as scoundrels and mercenaries. To supplement their meagre pay, they compete for off-hours work with the city's laborious, driving down wages, stoking economic hatred. Tavern brawls and baccalaureate scuffles are common. The air is thick with mutual contempt. For 18 months, Boston is a powder keg, and the British government, with a stunning lack of foresight, keeps scattering lit matches. The tension builds in a series of violent vignettes. A riot over the seizure of a merchant sloop, Liberty. A confrontation at a ropeworks where soldiers are dared to fight. Every day, a new insult, a new threat. By March of 1770, the fuse is short. The deep winter cold has forced idle men into crowded taverns, where rum and resentment mix freely. The soldiers are hated, taunted, provoked. They are under orders, supreme restraint. Do not fire. Do not give the rabble-rousers what they want. They must stand and take the abuse, the projectiles, the chaos. They are men, not statues. And on the night of March 5th, their discipline, stretched thinner than ice on a puddle, finally snaps. We return to King Street. The gunsmoke is thinning. The immediate, visceral reaction is not a call to arms, but a profound, city-wide shock. Lieutenant Governor Thomas Hutchinson, facing a seething crowd from the balcony of the townhouse, promises justice. The law shall have its course, he shouts into the frigid air. He orders Captain Preston and his 8 men arrested. They are marched, under heavy guard, to the stone fortress of the town jail for their own protection. The crowd, momentarily placated, disperses, leaving the night to the victims and the whispers. By morning, under a bleak, grey sky, the story is already hardening into legend. Paul Revere, a silversmith and fervent patriot, is at work, not with musket or pamphlet, but with engraving tool. He creates an image that will sweep through the colonies, the bloody massacre perpetrated in King Street. It is not a news report. It is propaganda of masterful potency. In Revere's print, the British soldiers are in a neat, disciplined line, firing on command into a peaceful, well-dressed crowd. Captain Preston stands behind them, sword raised, ordering the slaughter. Crispus Attucks, front and center, is depicted as a white man. The image screams of calculated, cold-blooded murder. It is a lie, a powerful, effective lie. But the truth of that night is far more chaotic, more human, and in many ways, more dangerous for the crown. The real story is not of a planned massacre, but of a tragic, bloody accident born of profound systemic failure and mutual hatred. The trial that follows will not just decide the fate of 8 soldiers and their captain. It will put the very soul of British justice on trial in America. The stillness that settles over Boston on the morning of March 6th is a lie. It is the deceptive calm of a deep wound before the throbbing begins. The sun, weak and pale, exposes the scene in King Street with a brutal clarity. The blood has frozen into the cobblestones, a rust-colored Rorschach test for a terrified town. Men in heavy coats stand in small, hushed clusters, pointing at the spots where Gray, Attucks, Maverick fell. Their whispers hang in the air like the last traces of powder smoke. The bodies of the dead have been carried away, but their presence is a ghostly pressure on the city. Samuel Maverick lies in his mother's parlor, his young life ebbing away with the dawn. Patrick Carr, the Irishman, is being treated for a wound the doctor knows is mortal. In the stone vault of the jail, Captain Thomas Preston and his 8 soldiers wait. They can hear the mob outside, a beast that has not slept, only grown hungrier. The cry is no longer just lobster. It is a new, more chilling demand. Bring out the murderers. Give them to us. The authorities face an impossible choice. Try the soldiers in Boston and risk a lynching that would ignite a war. Ship them to London for trial and prove every patriot fear about the suspension of colonial justice. The Lieutenant Governor, Hutchinson, chooses the law. The trial will be here, but it must be seen to be fair or all is lost. Enter the man for the defense, a reluctant, proud, brilliant lawyer named John Adams. Cousin to the firebrand Samuel Adams, John is a patriot, but of a different breed. He believes in the law as a divine code, a fortress against chaos. When asked to defend the hated soldiers, his principles buckle under the weight of public scorn. The worst decision of my life, he would later write. Yet, he takes the case. He knows that if the mob can dictate a verdict, then the British are not the only tyrants in Boston. The prosecution is led by Samuel Quincy and Robert Treat Paine. Their job is not difficult on the surface. 11 shots, 5 dead men. The facts seem to speak for themselves. Murder. But Adams, aided by the keen legal mind of Josiah Quincy Jr., another patriot acting for the defense, begins to weave a different narrative. He does not start with the flash of muskets. He starts with the months, the years, of constant, grinding provocation. He calls witness after witness, not to the shooting, but to the siege. The courtroom, packed and sweltering despite the winter cold outside, hears tales of daily humiliations. A soldier beaten with a cordwood stick. A sentry pelted with oyster shells and horse dung. Taunts of bloody back and lousy rascal ringing in their ears every time they walk the streets. Adams paints a picture not of a peaceful crowd, but of a motley rabble of saucy boys Negroes and mulattoes Irish Teagues and outlandish Jacktars, his words harsh to modern ears designed to appeal to the jury's prejudices. He describes a mob armed with clubs, cutlasses, and chunks of ice, their intent clear, to execute their mischief upon the soldiers. He focuses on that crucial, chaotic moment. The word fire. Who gave it? Multiple witnesses, for the prosecution, swear it came from Captain Preston. But under Adams's sharp cross-examination, their stories unravel. One man, standing here, could not possibly have seen the captain's lips from there. Another admits the crowd was screaming so loudly, distinguishing one voice was impossible. Adams suggests, powerfully, that the shout came not from an officer, but from the mob itself, a taunt turned deadly, mistaken for an order in the bedlam. Then, the star witness for the defense, a man on his deathbed. Patrick Carr, the 5th victim, lingers for 9 days after the shooting. Knowing he is dying, the attending doctor asks him for the truth. Carr's testimony, read aloud in the hushed court, is a thunderclap. He states that he saw the soldiers being attacked, pelted, and threatened. He believes they fired in self-defense. And, crucially, he absolves them of malice. He forgave the man who shot him, the doctor testifies, and said he knew it was no malice, but that the soldiers were alarmed and had fired through fear. Adams seizes on this. Fear. Not tyranny, not bloodlust, but the primal, human instinct of a cornered man. In his closing argument, his voice rising not in rage but in solemn conviction, he makes his timeless appeal. Facts are stubborn things, he intones, and whatever may be our wishes, our inclinations, or the dictates of our passion, they cannot alter the state of facts and evidence. He argues the law of self-preservation. The sentry, alone, assaulted, threatened, with 100 people pressing upon him. Was it a reasonable, a legal provocation for the people to assault him? Had he not a right to kill in his own defense? He turns the soldiers from aggressors into victims of circumstance, men who saw the necessity of firing for their own defense and to preserve the lives of their fellow soldiers. The jury, composed of Boston men who lived through the same tensions, deliberates. The world holds its breath. The verdict: Captain Preston and 6 of the soldiers are acquitted of all charges. 2 soldiers, Montgomery and Kilroy, are found guilty not of murder, but of the lesser charge of manslaughter. Their punishment? Branding on the thumb in open court, and then release. It is a stunning victory for the rule of law, but it is a political catastrophe for the British government. John Adams has proven that Boston can be just, but in doing so, he has also cemented a far more dangerous narrative for the Crown. The court has officially recognized that the soldiers were provoked, that the mob was an armed and threatening entity, that the deep, systemic hatred of the citizenry was a tangible, violent force. The massacre was, in the eyes of the law, a tragic riot. But the people do not live in a court of law. They live in a world of emotion, of image, of story. And Paul Revere's story is the one they believe. The bloody massacre print is everywhere. The tale of innocent civilians gunned down by a tyrannical regime is clean, simple, and powerful. It needs no legal nuance. It feeds a fury that a legal acquittal cannot quench. The immediate fallout is a tactical retreat by the British. Stunned by the unified fury of the colonies, Parliament repeals most of the Townshend Acts. The tax on tea remains, a stubborn, symbolic assertion of power, but the troops are pulled out of Boston. For a moment, the tension eases. The harbour ice thaws. Trade resumes. Some dare to hope the crisis has passed, but the psychic landscape of Boston is forever altered. The 5 dead are buried as martyrs in a common grave at Granary Burying Ground. The anniversary of March 5th is commemorated each year with a speech, a procession, a public reading of the victims' names. It becomes a sacred day of mourning and warning, expertly orchestrated by men like Samuel Adams and the Sons of Liberty, a yearly rekindling of the fire. For the men who were there, life diverges. Captain Thomas Preston, acquitted but broken, returns to England and fades into obscurity. The soldiers, their thumbs branded or their names cleared, vanish from history. John Adams, despite his fears, finds his reputation for integrity enhanced. The principal defense becomes a cornerstone of his path toward the presidency. And in the streets of Boston, a new, more radical spirit is born. Committees of correspondence form, linking the colonies in a web of shared grievance and rebellion. The massacre has provided them with more than martyrs. It has provided a blueprint. They have seen how raw power, the power of the mob, the power of the musket, can be challenged by the power of the press, the power of organized protest, and the power of a single, unshakable idea, that they are no longer subjects to be commanded, but citizens to be wronged. The fuse, lit on that frozen night, is now a smoldering line, snaking through the next 5 years of history. It will lead to a midnight ride, to tea floating in a harbour, to the shot heard round the world. But on March 6, 1770, all that is in the unborn future. For now, Boston is a city nursing a deep, quiet, and transformative rage. The quiet years that follow the massacre are anything but quiet. They are a slow, gathering storm. The withdrawal of redcoats from Boston streets is seen not as a magnanimous peace, but as a victory won by pressure and fear. The Townshend Acts are gone, save for that one, persistent, insulting tax on tea. A principle remains, like a thorn left in a healing wound. It festered. Paul Revere's engraving did its work. Copies circulated from New Hampshire to Georgia, a visceral primer on British brutality. The 5 dead were sanctified, their story simplified into a parable of innocent blood spilled by imperial ambition. Each year, on the 5th of March, Boston staged a solemn spectacle. Bells tolled. A haunting oration was delivered, recounting the horrors of that night, warning against standing armies and lost liberties. Samuel Adams, the master propagandist, ensured the flame of outrage was never allowed to die to embers. And through it all, the thorn remained. The Tea Act of 1773 was not a new tax, but a clever, cynical piece of economic manipulation. It gave the nearly bankrupt East India Company a monopoly on selling tea to the colonies, undercutting smugglers and legitimate merchants alike. It was a bailout, disguised as a bargain. But to Boston, it was a trap. To pay the small, remaining duty on this cheap tea was to surrender the principle of no taxation without representation. It was a test of will. The harbour, once again, becomes the stage. It is December 16th, 1773. The air is cold again, but this time, it is electric with purpose, not chaotic rage. Thousands pack the Old South Meeting House, not a mob, but a town meeting pushed to its breaking point. The royal governor refuses to let 3 ships, the Dartmouth, the Eleanor, the Beaver, leave without unloading their cargo of East India Company tea. As dusk falls, a signal is given. Not church bells this time, but a war whoop. From the meeting house stream men, not as an unruly crowd, but as a disciplined, if unusual, force. Their faces are smeared with soot and grease paint, crude attempts at disguise that make them look like devils in the twilight. They are dressed in ragged blankets, feathers in their hair, a mockery of Mohawk warriors. But their movements are precise. They march in silence to Griffin's Wharf. The only sounds are the lap of dark water against hulls, the creak of ropes, and the methodical thunk of axes splitting chests. For 3 hours, under a clear, cold moon, they work. 342 chests of finely milled tea are hauled from the holds, split open, and dumped into the salt water. The harbour is fouled with a sprawling, fragrant slick of Darjeeling and Bohea, worth a fortune. Not a single other item is stolen. Not a ship is damaged. It is an act of breathtaking, theatrical destruction, a crime of pure principle. When the sun rises, Boston Harbour looks like a giant's teapot. The Mohawks have vanished, leaving only the evidence and a message, crystal clear: your laws will not govern us. Your taxes we will not pay. The response from London is not a trial, but a thunderclap of punitive rage. They are called the Coercive Acts. In Boston, they are known as the Intolerable Acts. The port of Boston is sealed. No ship can enter or leave, an economic death sentence for a maritime city. The Charter of Massachusetts is rewritten, stripping the colony of self-rule. Town meetings are banned. Royal officials accused of crimes are to be tried in England, beyond colonial justice. And a new quartering act gives soldiers the right to commandeer private homes. The troops return, not in companies, but in regiments. This time, they are not here to police customs. They are here to subdue a rebellious province. Their commander is General Thomas Gage. He moves the seat of government to Salem and fortifies Boston Neck, turning the city into a garrison, a cage. The Redcoats are no longer just hated. They are an army of occupation, the iron proof of tyranny. Now, the fuse lit on King Street reaches the powder keg. The other colonies watch, aghast. If this can be done to Boston, it can be done to any of them. The committees of correspondence crackle with urgent messages. Supplies begin to trickle into Boston overland, from as far away as South Carolina, a stunning act of solidarity. The First Continental Congress convenes in Philadelphia, a gathering of once disparate colonies now united in outrage. They endorse a radical measure, a continental association, a complete boycott of all British goods. The economic war becomes total. In Massachusetts, outside of Boston held by Gage, a shadow government forms. The provincial Congress meets illegally. They begin to stockpile weapons, gunpowder, and cannon in the countryside. Militia units drill with a new intensity on village greens. They are no longer just a defense force, they are becoming an army. And within the militia, a special group is formed, Minute Men, pledged to be ready to fight at a minute's notice. The winter of 1774 to 75 is one of grim preparation. In Boston, soldiers and citizens eye each other with a cold, familiar hatred, the memory of the massacre a fresh scar. In the villages of Concord and Worcester, in the blacksmith shops of Lexington, men melt down pewter mugs for musket balls and stitch leather for cartridge boxes. The air smells of grinding gunpowder and nervous sweat. General Gage, in his headquarters, receives orders from London. He must seize the rebellion's leaders and, crucially, their military stores. His spies tell him the largest cache is in the town of Concord, 18 miles inland. He plans a secret, nighttime march of his elite grenadiers and light infantry to seize the stores before the alarm can be raised. But Boston is a city of watching eyes. The network of patriots is vast, efficient, and silent. On the night of April 18, 1775, as British boats are quietly rowed across the Charles River, 2 lanterns are hung in the steeple of Christ Church, 2 if by sea. A horseman is already waiting in Charlestown. His name is Paul Revere. Another, William Dawes, takes a different route. They ride into the night, not with a cry of fire, but with a new, more urgent warning: the regulars are out. Their hoofbeats are the drumroll of the coming storm. In every farmhouse, every hamlet, men are roused from sleep. Muskets are grabbed from over hearths. Minutemen muster on the green at Lexington, a bare 70 of them, standing in the pre-dawn chill of April 19th. They are not there to start a war. They are there to stand their ground, a symbolic protest of armed citizens. As the first light stains the east, the British column, over 700 strong in brilliant red and white, marches into view. Their commander, Major John Pitcairn, rides forward. "Lay down your arms, you damned rebels, and disperse," he shouts. The militia captain, John Parker, gives a different order. "Stand your ground. Don't fire unless fired upon. But if they mean to have a war, let it begin here." A shot rings out. No one knows who fired it. A British soldier? A nervous militiaman? A spectator from behind a wall? Just like the cry of fire. On King Street 5 years earlier, its origin is lost to history, but its consequence is absolute. A volley crashes from the British line. Then a chaotic, running fusillade. When the smoke clears, 8 Minutemen lie dead on the Lexington Green, 10 more wounded. The Redcoats give a cheer, form their ranks, and march on toward Concord. The war has begun, not with a declaration, but with that single, enigmatic shot, the direct, bloody descendant of the volley in King Street. In Concord, a larger force of militia gathers. At the North Bridge, they see smoke rising from the town. The British are burning what few supplies they found. Thinking their homes are being put to the torch, the militia advances. The regulars stationed at the bridge fire first, killing 2. This time, the militia's return fire is disciplined, deliberate. It is the shot heard round the world. British soldiers fall. For the first time, the King's invincible army is seen to retreat. What follows is not a battle, but a nightmare. As the British column marches the 18 miles back to Boston, militia and Minutemen swarm from behind every stone wall, every tree, every hill. It is a gauntlet of fire from an invisible enemy. The road becomes a bloody trail of discarded equipment and fallen men in red coats. Only a desperate, final push with reinforcements from Boston saves the expedition from total annihilation. By day's end, nearly 300 British soldiers are killed, wounded, or missing. The Colonial losses are less than 100. The siege of Boston begins the next day. From the surrounding hills, now thick with thousands of Colonial militia, the city and its trapped army are watched. The fuse has burned to its end. The powder keg has exploded. The Boston Massacre did not cause the American Revolution. The causes were vast, economic, philosophical, and political. But the massacre provided the revolution with its essential emotional currency, martyrdom. It transformed abstract arguments about taxes and representation into a visceral, human story of life, death, and injustice. It gave the colonists a face for their enemy, not a distant parliament, but the armed, occupying soldier on their street corner. And most importantly, it taught them a terrifying, exhilarating lesson, that the mighty British Empire could be made to bleed and to blink. The siege is a tense, hungry stalemate that stretches from the bloody spring of 1775 into the deep winter of 1776. Boston is an island of red in a sea of rebellious color. From their fortifications on the hills ringing the city, Breed's Hill, Bunker Hill, the Colonial militia, now christened the Continental Army under the command of George Washington, looks down upon the occupied town. The air is often thick with the smell of salt, sewage, and the constant, smoky aroma of thousands of cooking fires from both camps. Inside Boston, the mood is desperate. The once bustling port is dead, blockaded by American privateers. Food rots on distant docks while in the city, prices skyrocket. Fresh meat is a memory. The townspeople who remain, many patriots having fled, share their cramped spaces with bored, sullen soldiers. The memory of the massacre is a ghost in every alley, a silent accusation between citizen and soldier with every passing glance. The British soldiers, who once strutted through the streets as masters, now feel the walls closing in. They are besieged not just by an army, but by the chilling consequence of their own actions, the final, logical outcome of the hostility that boiled over on King Street. Then, on a freezing night in March 1776, the stalemate is broken not by cannon, but by darkness and daring. Washington seizes the heights of Dorchester Heights, overlooking the city and the harbor. His men perform a miracle of overnight labor, dragging cannon hauled from distant Fort Ticonderoga up the steep slopes. They use bundles of sticks and hay to muffle the sounds of their work. When the British awake on the morning of March 5th, the 6th anniversary of the massacre, they stare in disbelief at the new, impregnable fortress that has materialized in the night, its guns trained directly on the fleet and their positions. General William Howe, who had replaced Gage, understands instantly. The harbor, his lifeline, is now a shooting gallery. To attack the heights would be another Bunker Hill, a bloodbath. He has only one choice: evacuate. For 11 days, an armada of ships crowds the harbor. The loading is chaotic, frantic. Loyalists by the thousand, terrified of Patriot retribution, clamor for passage, selling their worldly goods for a place on a transport. The air is filled with the sounds of hammering, shouted orders, and the desperate cries of those left behind. On March 17, 1776, the last British boats push off from Long Wharf. The occupation of Boston is over. The city is liberated without a final, cataclysmic battle. The Redcoats, the source of a decade of tension and bloodshed, simply leave. They sail for Halifax, taking with them the lingering fear of the king's power, but leaving behind the undeniable truth of the king's defeat. The war will rage for 7 more years, from New York to Charleston, from Saratoga to Yorktown. But in many ways, the revolution, the psychological break, was forged in Boston, in the years between the flash of muskets on King Street and the silent, defiant cannon on Dorchester Heights. The story of the Boston Massacre does not end with the last British ship disappearing over the horizon. It enters a new, contentious phase, the battle for memory. Almost immediately, the event becomes a tool, a symbol to be wielded. For the Patriots, it is the foundational myth of a new nation. The 5 victims are eternal martyrs. Their story is told and retold, stripped of its complicating details, the mob violence, the provocation, the legal acquittals. In this telling, it is a pure, unambiguous act of tyranny. The annual March 5th orations continue, now serving to solidify national identity and justify the ongoing, bloody war. The massacre is the first act in the tragic drama of the revolution, the necessary spark. But what of the British perspective and the uncomfortable facts? For over a century, the Patriot narrative held absolute sway. The soldiers were murderers. The crowd was innocent. John Adams's successful defense was an inconvenient footnote, an example of his legal brilliance but not a reflection of truth. Modern historians, however, have sifted through the trial transcripts, the personal letters, the meteorological reports, and the physical evidence. They have painted a picture far murkier, and in its complexity, far more human. The debate hinges on three unresolved mysteries, each a knot of conflicting testimony and lost context. First, the question of command. Did Captain Preston give the order to fire? The trial established reasonable doubt, but not certainty. Some historians suggest a panicked soldier, struck by a club or a piece of ice, fired first, and the others, believing it an order, followed. A classic fog of war scenario, compressed into a single, chaotic street. Second, the nature of the crowd. Were they a peaceful gathering of citizens, or a violent, armed mob intent on drawing blood? Testimony exists for both. Many in the crowd were indeed laborious and sailors, men with reason to hate the soldiers competing for their jobs. Others were merely curious bystanders. The presence of clubs, cutlasses, and chunks of ice is well documented. The line between a political protest and a riot, as it often does, had blurred beyond recognition by that fatal moment. Third, and most profound, the role of Crispus Attucks. He is celebrated as the first martyr, a symbol of multi-ethnic America's fight for freedom. Yet, witness descriptions place him at the very front, wielding a large cordwood stick, striking at soldiers, and being the most vocal and aggressive of the crowd. Was he a brave freedom fighter leading the charge against oppression? Or was he, as John Adams coldly argued to the jury, part of a motley rabble whose actions directly precipitated the violence? His heroism and his agency are inextricably tied to the uncomfortable reality that his actions, however justified by his lived experience of oppression, may have helped trigger the very tragedy that immortalized him. These are not questions with easy answers. They force us to sit in the discomfort of history, where heroes are flawed, victims are active participants, and the line between justifiable resistance and reckless provocation is as thin as a musket flash. The final, lingering ghost of the massacre is not a person, but a sound, that single, shouted word, fire. It hangs in the historical record, unattributed, a ghost command. It is the perfect metaphor for the event itself, a spark whose origin is debated, but whose world-altering consequence is etched in stone and blood. Today, a ring of cobblestones embedded in a quiet square in downtown Boston marks the site. Traffic flows around it. Tourists snap pictures. It is a peaceful place. But stand there at night, in the cold, and you can almost hear it. The crunch of ice. The jeering crowd. The tense, metallic click of muskets being primed. And then, the roar. The Boston Massacre did not ignite the American Revolution in a direct, causal line. Revolutions are not born from single events, but from a critical mass of injustice, ideology, and opportunity. What the massacre did was provide the revolution with its soul, its emotional core of righteous anger and sacrifice. It turned pamphlets into passion, arguments into anguish, and subjects into citizens willing to risk everything. It proved that the price of liberty, as the saying would later go, is eternal vigilance. And sometimes, that vigilance is paid in blood on frozen cobblestones, under a cold and indifferent moon.